Did you know that deep inside the Vatican's secret archives lies an ancient manuscript describing blood-drinking creatures that once terrorized humanity for thousands of years? From the Vampire Codex to the Black Treaties forged between kings and these mysterious beings, history has been erased, burned, and rewritten to hide the truth. But now the silence is breaking. In this video, Tales Mythology Plus will uncover the terrifying secrets the Church tried to bury for centuries, dark conspiracies, forbidden knowledge, and ancient wars between humans and creatures of the night are waiting to be revealed. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any of our shocking mythology stories, mysteries, and hidden truths from history. Scene 1. Shadows behind the cross. The night before he disappeared, Father Alessandro locked himself inside the Vatican's deepest archives. Security footage later showed him leaving the building, clutching a leather-bound manuscript wrapped in a tattered crimson cloth. 2 days later, he was gone. No trace, no explanation. For decades, whispers floated through Rome's cobbled streets about a chamber beneath the Apostolic Palace, known only by its codename, Hereticus Maximus. Few believed it existed. Fewer still survived to speak of what it contained. But when fragments of the manuscript Father Alessandro carried surfaced online last year, pages filled with anatomical sketches of inhuman creatures, rituals in dead languages, and maps marked with solar eclipses, a storm erupted across the world of historians, scientists, and occult researchers. The Vatican called the documents forgeries, yet cryptographers confirmed the handwriting matched 4th century ecclesiastical records. Biologists noted chilling similarities between the sketches and real genetic anomalies discovered in Eastern Europe. And perhaps most disturbingly, one line in faded Latin appeared repeatedly: Sanguis est vinculum, sanguis est maledictum. Blood is the bond, blood is the curse. This was no ordinary manuscript. This was the Codex Sanguina, a text the Church denied existed for over 1,500 years. What was so dangerous that men of God risked their lives to bury it? Tonight, we will uncover that secret. Scene 2. Echoes of blood in ancient Sumer. The search for truth takes us far from the marble halls of the Vatican, across centuries and deserts, to the cradle of civilization itself, ancient Sumer. Long before the rise of Greece or Rome, before the pyramids of Egypt pierced the skies, the Sumerians carved their histories into wet clay with reed pens, leaving behind tens of thousands of cuneiform tablets. Farmers recorded crop yields, kings chronicled wars, priests documented eclipses and floods, and among these records, archaeologists began noticing something strange: accounts describing Etchimaru, beings who walked only by night, who drained the life from animals and from people. These were not bedtime stories meant to scare children into obedience. These were matter-of-fact reports carved by temple scribes, dates of attacks, victims identified by name, symptoms described in unsettling precision: skin drained of color, bodies rigid at dawn, an aversion to sunlight so violent that even a single ray caused spasms before death. One tablet, now kept in the Iraq Museum, reads: On the night of the 7th moon, the shadow feeder took the herdsman's son. His mother wept at the temple. The priests gathered, marked the door with ash, and burned the bitter root to drive it away. This wasn't just myth, it was ritual response. The Sumerians developed entire protocols to identify, repel, and sometimes destroy these so-called shadow feeders. Rituals involving sacred metals, incantations aligned with lunar cycles, even public trials to expose suspected victims of attacks or described in clinical detail. And here lies the first unsettling question. Why would the earliest civilization waste precious resources documenting something imaginary when their tablets also track real plagues, real floods, real wars? Historians argue over this to this day. Some claim it was a way to explain disease before germ theory. Others suspect mass hysteria, but then the pattern grew impossible to ignore, because the Sumerians weren't alone. Consider this. In modern epidemiology, when scientists detect outbreaks of Ebola, Zika, COVID, they map cases on timelines, trace sources, predict spread. This is how we fight invisible enemies today. What the Sumerians did looks eerily similar. Attack dates lined up with lunar phases. Victims' locations formed clusters near rivers or trade routes. They documented symptoms in sequence: the initial fever, followed by sudden anemia, followed by death before sunrise. It reads less like folklore and more like early public health records. And when neighboring civilizations, Spaniards, Akkadians, later the Hittites, began keeping the same kind of records with the same symptoms, separated by hundreds of miles and centuries, that's when the story stopped looking like myth entirely. During the 14th century's Black Death, terrified Europeans blamed witches, Jews, even cats for the plague's spread. Centuries later, science revealed the real culprit: bacteria carried by fleas. What if the Sumerians had stumbled on something real, a predator, a parasite, a hybrid disease so terrifying and poorly understood that only ritual and myth could contain it? Archaeologists have even unearthed mass graves in Mesopotamia dated to the same periods as these vampiric records. Many skeletons bear strange, injurious stakes through rib cages, skulls weighted with heavy stones, jaws nailed shut, methods mirrored in vampire legends across Europe millennia later. Coincidence? Perhaps, but coincidence stacked this high begins to look like design. As these records spread across Mesopotamia, fear traveled with them. By the time the Babylonians rose to power, they inherited not just Sumer's writing and astronomy, but also its terror of the night feeders. And the Babylonians, as we'll see next, took that terror and turned it into law. Because for them, these creatures weren't just intruders, they were enemies of the state. Scene 3. Babylon's Chronicles of Fear. By the time the Babylonians inherited the Fertile Crescent from the Sumerians, the empire had mastered astronomy, law, and engineering. They gave us Hammurabi's code, ziggurats scraping the heavens, and some of the earliest medical texts known to man. And woven between laws about theft, property disputes, and family honor were chilling entries carved into clay. Records of attacks by the Lilu and Lilichu, names that still echo through demonology and folklore today. The Babylonians documented these beings not as superstitions, but as recurring threats. Priests and scribes catalogued cases on tablets stored in temple libraries, dates, victims, symptoms, and even suspected motives behind attacks. Some inscriptions describe creatures drinking the breath from sleeping children. Others tell of soldiers found drained of blood along remote trade roads. One tablet, translated in the 1920s, details an entire investigation by royal decree. In the month of Asher, under the waxing moon, 3 merchants vanished on the road to Nineveh. Their bodies were found cold, stiff, and without blood. The king commands the priests of Marduk to purify the land and cast out the night demons. This wasn't random hysteria. This was administration, civil defense, like governors today responding to outbreaks or insurgencies. Babylonian kings issued orders to contain and eliminate threats, real or imagined, that terrified the populace. And this is where history takes an even stranger turn. Ritual meets bureaucracy. Archaeologists uncovered temple records describing entire protocols for dealing with suspected attacks. Victims' homes were sealed with ash and pitch. Priests mixed bitter herbs into wines used in purification rituals. Lunar calendars dictated nights of fasting and watchfulness, as if the sky itself conspired with the attackers. Some rituals even resemble modern quarantine practices. Suspected victims were isolated, their belongings burned, neighbors warned not to approach. What's remarkable isn't just the similarity to modern epidemic responses, it's that these practices span centuries, repeated again and again across multiple reigns. Either the Babylonians faced real, recurring events, or an incredibly persistent mass delusion shaped nearly 1,000 years of policy, law, codes, and the night feeders. Here's where it grows darker. Fragments of Babylonian legal codes suggest punishments for those accused of harboring or aiding these entities. One half-broken tablet from the city of Uruk reads, "He who shelters the shadow feeder brings curse upon the land. He shall be cast into the river." The phrasing mirrors laws against treason and rebellion. To Babylonian rulers, the night feeders weren't just monsters. They were existential threats to divine order, political stability, and cosmic balance. This fits the Mesopotamian worldview perfectly. Kings ruled by divine mandate. Anything that defied that order, rebels, invaders, demands, was chaos incarnate. But unlike rebels or invaders, these creatures struck in silence, left no armies, claimed no thrones. They attacked the lifeblood of the empire itself, its people. Reading these texts today, historians debate whether Babylonian vampires were metaphors for disease, famine, or foreign raiders. After all, fear often dresses itself in supernatural clothing. But here's the problem. The Babylonians weren't alone. Half a world away in China's Song dynasty, oracle bones mention Jung Shishtif, hopping corpses draining life from villages. In India's Vedic texts, Vetalas haunt cremation grounds, feeding on flesh and blood. Separate cultures, separate languages, separate centuries, yet the same descriptions. Could they all have invented the same myth by coincidence? Or were they describing fragments of the same phenomenon through different cultural lenses? Even today, epidemiologists cross-reference disease outbreaks worldwide. A new virus in one country triggers alerts across continents. Could ancient scribes have done something similar, tracking a threat older than history itself? The military response. One chilling Babylonian chronicle describes soldiers accompanying priests on night watches outside city walls. Torches lined roads. Arrows tipped with silver or sacred herbs were distributed. It reads like counterinsurgency tactics, except the enemy wasn't human. Roman military records centuries later would echo this. Entire legions keeping nocturnal watch, designing battle formations for nighttime assaults. Folklore loves its fangs and coffins, but ancient empires acted as if they fought a war. As Babylon documented its fears in clay and blood, another civilization was preparing its own archives of terror. On the banks of the Nile, among pyramids and papyrus scrolls, Egyptian priests recorded cases that would make even hardened pharaohs tremble. For there, the night feeders grew organized. Scene 4, Egypt's medical papyrus and the Crimson Hunger. The desert sun blazed over the Nile as pharaohs ruled, priests prayed, and scribes filled papyrus scrolls with everything from hymns to harvest counts. Yet hidden among temple records and medical treatises lay something strange, records describing victims who shunned daylight, grew pale as bone, and craved blood. Unlike Mesopotamian scribes, who framed these encounters in spiritual terms, Egyptian priests approached the phenomenon with surgical precision. They belonged to a civilization obsessed with anatomy, medicine, and the afterlife. They dissected corpses, mapped pulse points, catalogued disease, and when the night feeders appeared, they recorded symptoms with the same cold clarity. One papyrus dated to Egypt's Old Kingdom lists over 50 separate incidents. Victims found at dawn with skin white as linen, corpses drained of the Red River, survivors developing violent aversions to sunlight, a compulsive need for crimson pigments in food and drink. The Egyptians even gave it a name, the Crimson Hunger, and unlike folklore elsewhere, their records were procedural designed for temple physicians. Which herbs to burn, which prayers to chant, which amulets to place near the victim's bed. This wasn't myth to them. This was medicine. Evidence in stone and scrolls. Archaeologists discovered wall carvings in tombs depicting figures restraining pale, thrashing victims, while priests applied salves or recited incantations. Some murals even show guards patrolling temple grounds at night, armed with spears tipped in silver, a metal the Egyptians associated with purity and lunar power. And here's the most unsettling part. Some mummies buried during this era show signs of throat trauma, puncture-like wounds, vertebrae damage consistent with impalement. Why would a civilization so devoted to preserving bodies for eternity intentionally desecrate some corpses unless they feared what might rise from them? Medicine or myth? Historians debate whether Egyptian vampires were actually victims of diseases like rabies or porphyria. Rabies can cause light sensitivity, aggression, and biting behaviors. Porphyria, a rare blood disorder, leads to blistered skin when exposed to sunlight and, in severe cases, anemia. So extreme patients once drank animal blood as treatment. But here's the problem. Neither disease explains mass graves with stakes through hearts, nor why cultures oceans apart describe the same traits: predatory behavior, blood loss, nocturnal attacks over thousands of years. And the Egyptians weren't writing poetry here. Their papyri read like case reports, eerily similar to how modern doctors document outbreaks for the CDC or WHO. One translated scroll even includes what might be the first recorded quarantine order in history: "Let no man enter the house where the son forsaken lies, lest the curse pass to him." A curse or a contagion. Consider the 19th century cholera epidemics. Before germ theory, people thought miasmas, bad air, spread disease. Entire neighborhoods were burned to stop the invisible killer. In the same way, Egypt's priests may have faced something real without understanding it: something that spread in darkness, killed swiftly, and left survivors changed. Even more chilling, some papyri describe creatures speaking in human tongues, bargaining for offerings of livestock or criminals in exchange for leaving villages unharmed. Were these myths to explain why some outbreaks mysteriously ended, or traces of something far stranger? The Pharaoh's Decree, a newly translated inscription from the reign of Pharaoh Djedkare orders: "Let the temples keep record of the Pale Ones. Let the high priests guard the secret rites. Let none speak of it before the people." Here we see the first signs of systematic suppression: and wedge locked behind temple walls, hidden from commoners. Centuries later, the Catholic Church would perfect this strategy on a global scale. But Egypt may have invented it, because as Greece and Rome inherited fragments of this knowledge, the night feeders gained new names: Lamia, Empusa, Lemus, and the war against them escalated from ritual to outright military strategy. For the first time in history, empires would mobilize against the creatures of the dark, and they would do so with terrifying efficiency. Scene 5. Lamias of Greece and Rome's Phantom Wars. By the time Greek city-states rose along the Aegean coast, tales of blood-drinking creatures had already drifted westward from Mesopotamia and Egypt, like desert winds carrying whispers of fear. But the Greeks gave these beings new names and faces: the Lamia, the Empusa, seductive, nocturnal figures who lured young men to their deaths; women with faces like goddesses, but eyes glinting with something feral. Poets like Aristophanes mocked them on stage. Children heard bedtime warnings about wandering at night. Yet hidden beneath the laughter and myth-making were records buried in temple archivists describing entire villages found pale and silent after moonless nights. And as the Greeks expanded into colonies across the Mediterranean, reports followed them like shadows. Soldiers stationed in Thrace wrote of creatures attacking livestock. Sailors told of pale figures boarding ships under clouded skies, leaving only corpses by dawn. It was here that the phenomenon transformed from religious superstition into state concern. The Roman military takes notice. When Rome absorbed Greece and much of the Mediterranean, it also inherited centuries of fragmented reports about the night feeders. Roman generals were not men given to superstition. They conquered through roads, engineering, and iron discipline. Yet in military archives discovered near Hadrian's Wall in Britain, scholars found chilling references to nocturne hosts' nighttime enemies. One fragment orders extra watch rotations during certain lunar phases. Another instructs centurions to carry silvered blades during night patrols in Gaul. There are reports of phantoms attacking supply wagons. Most shocking, a strategy manual attributed to General Aulus Porciuso, Rome's invasion of Britain contains entire sections on nocturnal defense formations, flaming barriers, crescent-shaped camps allowing soldiers to see in all directions at night. Folklore does not invent military formations. Were these real battles? Skeptics argue these phantoms were likely bandits or hostile tribes using fear as a weapon. And indeed, psychological warfare often employs superstition to demoralize enemies. But Roman reports describe corpses drained of blood, entire squads found dead without signs of conventional combat, victims pale, rigid, and buried with stones in their mouths. A ritual echoed across Slavic Europe 1,000 years later to prevent the dead from rising. If these were just raiders, why the stakes? Why the stones? Why the silver? Here's where history echoes itself. During World War I, soldiers reported phantom snipers, ghostly apparitions, even entire battalions vanishing in fog. Stress, fear, and isolation breed legends. But the Romans weren't a superstitious peasantry. They were engineers, tacticians, road builders whose aqueducts still stand today. When they wrote instructions for dealing with nocturnal attackers, they did so with the same matter-of-fact tone used for bridge construction or crop logistics. And it wasn't just soldiers. Roman physicians like Galen documented patients with what they called morbus sanguinis, the blood sickness. Symptoms: exhaustion, sun sensitivity, unexplained anemia. Treatments involved herbal tonics, animal blood transfusions, and isolation. Sound familiar? The Empire Strikes Back. In 2021, archaeologists near Hadrian's Wall uncovered a mass grave dating to the late Roman period. Many skeletons bore puncture wounds to the chest and heavy stones pinning their limbs. Nearby inscriptions mention a local governor ordering purification rites after repeated attacks during the long nights. If real creatures stalked Rome's frontiers, history records no official victory, only fear, sporadic defenses, and eventually, silence. Suppression begins. Because as Christianity rose within the empire, the Church quickly recognized a theological problem. If such beings existed before Christ, they challenged the idea that evil entered the world solely through the fall of man or the devil's rebellion. Worse, pre-Christian civilizations already had rituals and weapons to fight them that threatened the Church's monopoly on salvation and spiritual authority. So when Emperor Constantine legalized Christianity in the 4th century, bishops debated whether knowledge of these creatures should be suppressed entirely. Somewhere in those debates, the decision was made: erase the records, rewrite the histories, control the narrative. And so began a campaign, not just against the night feeders, but against memory itself. Because deep beneath the Vatican, in vaults sealed for centuries, the Church locked away texts detailing everything from Roman battle reports to Egyptian medical scrolls to Babylonian exorcism, entire libraries of forbidden knowledge. What they feared most was not the creatures, it was the truth. Scene 6. The Church confronts a problem of faith. As Rome's legions faded and Christianity rose like incense smoke over the empire's ruins, a new power began shaping history, not with swords and phalanxes, but with parchment, doctrine, and faith. The early Church faced a strange dilemma. If stories of the nocturne hosts, the pale ones, the night feeders were truant to many records from Sumer, Babylon, Egypt, Greece, and Rome suggested something was wrath and evil had stalked humanity long before Christ, that raised uncomfortable questions. Did the Bible omit these creatures entirely? Did pre-Christian civilizations fight them without divine aid? If so, what did that mean for salvation, sin, and the Church's spiritual authority? For bishops preaching that Christ alone conquered death and darkness, the idea that Babylonians or Egyptians had fought monsters centuries earlier was unacceptable. And so, in 325 CE, under Emperor Constantine, the Council of Nicaea met, best known today, for codifying Christian doctrine. But buried in obscure letters from bishops attending that council, hints of another debate. The secret debates. One fragment from Bishop Eusebius of Caesarea describes heathen records containing pernicious tales of blood drinkers and shadow-born ones. He warns these texts confuse the faithful and must be set aside. Another letter, never intended for public eye, reveals bishops feared such knowledge might empower rival pagan sects. Many already performed rituals claiming to banish or repel dark forces. If Christians admitted these works, what made Christianity unique? Better, they decided, to call the creatures mythology. Better to burn the texts. Better to declare salvation flowed only through the Church. The birth of suppression. After Nicaea, imperial edicts ordered the collection of pagan manuscripts, Some were stored in imperial libraries, others destroyed outright. Christian scribes copied acceptable works, altering passages to remove references to blood drinkers or reframe them as demons defeated by saints rather than pagan warriors. This rewriting was so thorough that, for centuries, Europe believed vampire legends began in the Middle Ages. In reality, the Church had erased over 1,000 years of older records. Power and narrative. History shows this pattern repeatedly. Galileo silenced for proving the Earth orbits the Sun. Indigenous religions demonized by colonizers erasing native myths. Medical texts destroyed in China's Cultural Revolution for contradicting political ideology. Control knowledge. Control the story. Control the story. Control the people. The Church understood this long before modern governments or corporations weaponized information. Papal letters and the fear of chaos. In 398 CE, a confidential letter from Pope Siricius to African bishops mentions certain scrolls of wicked superstition discovered in Carthage. He instructs them to be locked away or destroyed, warning that the devil sows fear through heathen lies. But historians reading between the lines note, the scrolls weren't denied as false, they were feared as dangerous. Why fear what isn't real? Theological dilemma. If the night feeders predated Christianity, then God allowed evil long before humanity's fall. That contradicted Genesis. Worse, it implied pagan priests had battled darkness effectively without Christendoming the Church's monopoly on salvation. So bishops made a choice: erase the records, silence witnesses, declare pre-Christian victories over evil as myths and lies. And slowly, the ancient world's vast archives of vampiric lore vanished into locked vaults or hungry flames. Yet not everything was destroyed. Some texts were hidden instead, smuggled into monasteries, or buried beneath cathedrals. Over centuries, these fragments gathered like dry leaves in dark corners until one day, the Church realized it had assembled a collection so dangerous, so heretical, it could never see daylight again. They called it Hereticus Maximus, and deep within its forbidden vault lay the most chilling artifact of all, the Codex Sanguina. Scene 7. Secrets beneath the Vatican. Hereticus Maximus. Beneath the sunlit courtyards and gilded halls of the Vatican lies a world few have ever seen. Past marble staircases and frescoed corridors, through locked iron gates and torchlit tunnels, stretches the Archivum Secretum Apostolicum Vaticanum, Vatican's secret archives. Today, historians call it the Apostolic Archive, but for centuries, it was spoken of in hushed tones, as if the walls themselves guarded more than parchment and ink. Over 50 miles of shelving hold documents spanning 1,000 years of human history, papal bulls, royal correspondence, treaties, censored gospels, and according to whispers passed between archivists, priests, and unlucky scholars, something else, something older, something dangerous. They call it Hereticus Maximus, a section so restricted that even cardinals require papal permission to enter. The forbidden vaults. Few records mention the vault directly, those that do speak cryptically. A 15th century monk writes of a library where even angels fear to read. A 17th century Jesuit refers to codices bound in human skin, brought from Alexandria before its burning. A modern archivist, interviewed anonymously in 1978, claims some manuscripts are kept inside lead boxes, sealed against air, light and eyes. Over the centuries, only a handful of people reportedly gained full access: select popes, trusted archivists, a few scholars whose names now appear on lists of sudden deaths attributed to illness, accidents, even disappearances. Coincidence? Perhaps. But Vatican historians themselves admit at least 3 popes died under mysterious circumstances within months of consulting certain secret manuscripts. The Codex Sanguina emerges among the most feared texts. According to leaked letters from the 1800s, lies a manuscript bound in cracked crimson leather, written during the late Roman era. The Codex Sanguina. This tome reportedly spans hundreds of pages detailing anatomical diagrams of the night feeders' organs adapted for nocturnal predation, elongated canines, altered circulatory systems, rituals and weapons used across civilizations to repel or destroy them, silver, fire, sacred herbs, solar alignment ceremonies, maps of outbreaks across Mesopotamia, Egypt, Europe, even Asia, pinpointing nests and strongholds long erased from official histories, diplomatic treaties between human rulers, and what the text calls domus tenebriciuses of darkness, suggesting entire kingdoms, once negotiated with these beings rather than waging war. If authentic, the Codex would shatter centuries of theology, archaeology, and anthropology in one stroke. Why hide it? Skeptics argue the Vatican hides nothing more exotic than political embarrassments, proving papal corruption, secret dealings with kings, perhaps early Gospels contradicting official doctrine. But if so, why deny the Codex exists at all? Why claim it's medieval fiction when paleographers who've seen leaked photos insist the handwriting matches 4th century Latin? And why do multiple independent source archivists, monks, even a 1960s Italian journalist who vanished after claiming he saw the text describe the same crimson manuscript in consistent detail? What terrified the Church so much they would rather erase history than confront it? The papal deaths. Letters recovered by historian Alberto Tosati in 1987 describe Pope Sylvester II reading forbidden texts in 1003 AD, fully before dying of a sudden fever. Pope Benedict IX allegedly ordered sections of Hereticus Maximus burned after seeing anatomies not of God's creation. Pope Innocent VIII, who launched the infamous witch hunts, died weeks after commissioning a translation of certain Eastern manuscripts describing creatures eerily similar to those in the Codex. Superstition? Maybe. But even today, the Vatican refuses to release full mortality records of popes with known access to these archives. Because here lies the turning point. If the Codex Sanguina and its companion manuscripts exist, they don't merely describe isolated legends. They suggest a global campaign spanning millennia, involving empires, priests, and creatures the Church insists never existed. And at its climax, over 3,000 years ago, multiple civilizations allegedly joined forces to purge the earth of these beings in the single largest extermination event in human history. That is where we go next. Scene 8. The Codex Sanguina and the Great Vampire Purge. Hidden among the Codex Sanguina's cracked leather pages, written in precise Latin script across maps and marginal notes, lies a story so staggering it reads like apocalyptic prophecy. According to these texts, over 3,000 years ago, the night feeders did not merely haunt villages or stalk lonely travelers. They flourish organized, cunning, entrenched in every corner of the known world. And then humanity struck back. Not one empire, not one kingdom, but 6 of the greatest civilizations on earth. Sumerian city-states of Mesopotamia, Pharaonic Egypt along the Nile, the Vedic kingdoms of ancient India, Shang dynasty China, Mayan city-states in the Yucatan, Norse tribes in the far north, civilizations separated by oceans and centuries, civilizations that, as far as mainstream history teaches us, had little or no contact with one another. Yet the Codex claims they fought a coordinated war against the same enemy, the War of Night and Sun. According to translations smuggled out by anonymous archivists, the purge began after a series of great councils where priests, warriors, and kings from across these cultures shared knowledge, rituals, weapons, even astronomical data to predict solar eclipses. The Codex describes armies of thousands, armed with spears tipped in sacred metals, solar sanctuaries built to trap the creatures in sunlight during battles, eclipses timed with mass rituals, as priests chanted from towers, while soldiers attacked lairs marked on maps spanning 3 continents. One chilling passage reads, "And when the black sun covered the sky, the children of the blood were driven from caves and temples, pierced by spears of silver and ash, burned until their cries faded into the winds." This was not a village mob with pitchforks. This was global coordination millennia before telegraphs, printing presses, or radio. Archaeological evidence. For centuries, scholars dismissed such tales as medieval fantasy until modern archaeology began digging. In Turkey, Mass graves containing over 3,000 skeletons, with stakes through their chests, shocked researchers in the 1980s. In China, tombs dating to the Shang dynasty bear inscriptions about sky metal spears used against night demons. In Mexico, Mayan murals show warriors surrounding pale, emaciated figures beneath eclipsed suns. Forensic testing revealed something stranger: traces of silver and arsenic on ancient weapon fragments, both toxic to humans, yet repeatedly cited in vampire folklore as lethal to the undead. Coincidence? Or remnants of a forgotten war? Myth or memory? Historians skeptical of the Codex argue the global war reflects humanity's universal fear of disease, darkness, and death. Every culture invents monsters. Every culture tells stories of heroes defeating them. But skeptics struggle to explain the consistency across civilizations separated by oceans. How did Norse sagas, Mayan glyphs, and Egyptian papyri cultures that never met describe pale, blood-drinking creatures destroyed by sunlight and sacred metals? Carl Jung called such patterns archetypes, symbols embedded in humanity's collective unconscious. But what if they're not just symbols? What if they're memories? The aftermath. The Codex claims the purge lasted 7 years, culminating in a total solar eclipse, described in records from China, Babylon, and Mesoamerica, dated to roughly the same century. When the final battle ended, the night feeder population allegedly fell from tens of thousands to mere hundreds. Survivors fled into remote mountains, deserts, and forests. Some disguised themselves among humans, others vanished into legend. But here's the most chilling detail. The Codex says the war ended not because the creatures were exterminated, but because treaties were signed. Fragments describe agreements between human rulers and houses of night, promising sanctuary in exchange for peace. Certain bloodliners royal priests allegedly swore oaths of secrecy spanning generations. If true, this means parts of our ruling class may have once allied with the very creatures folklore calls monsters. Modern parallels. Think of how modern governments classify UFO sightings, bioweapon research, or nuclear accidents. Secrecy isn't just about hiding danger, it's about controlling fear, maintaining power, shaping history. The Codex suggests ancient rulers understood this well. By erasing records and sanctifying treaties, they turned a global war into fragmented myths, leaving future generations ignorant of what truly happened. And centuries later, as Christianity spread, the Church inherited not only these treaties and fragments, but the power to suppress them utterly. Because when Emperor Constantine converted to Christianity, he launched the final, systematic erasure of vampiric history, burning libraries, executing witnesses, and sealing away everything else in the Vatican's vaults. The operation had a name, whispered only in Latin: Project Silence. Scene 9. Constantine's Fires and Project Silence. By the 4th century CE, Christianity had grown from a persecuted sect to the rising faith of emperors. Constantine the Great, fresh from his vision of the cross before battle, embraced the Church not only as a spiritual authority, but as a political weapon. And with imperial backing came absolute power over history itself. Because Constantine and the bishops who advised him faced a problem. Scattered across the empire still lingered scrolls, tablets, and testimonies describing centuries of warfare against the Night Feeder Accords from Sumer, Egypt, Greece, and Rome itself. If allowed to survive, these accounts raised troubling questions. Did evil exist before original sin? Did pagan priests wield powers rivaling Christian exorcists? And worst of all, if ancient civilizations once fought darkness successfully without Christ, what did that say about the Church's claim, humanity's sole spiritual guardian? The solution was simple: erase it all. The Great Imperial Purge. Under Constantine's successors, imperial edicts ordered the destruction of pagan temples, libraries, and archives across the empire. In Alexandria, the Serapeum home 2,000s of scrolls burned. In Antioch and Rome, imperial soldiers seized private libraries containing unholy texts. Bishops across North Africa, Gaul, and the Near East compiled lists of works deemed heretical, condemning them to flames. Surviving chronicles describe wagons of manuscripts dumped into city squares, doused in oil, and set ablaze, while crowds cheered the triumph of the new faith over the old gods. But among these ashes vanished something far stranger than hymns to Zeus or temple tax records: the disappearing evidence. Letters between early Christian leaders mention scrolls of unnatural creatures targeted for destruction. One bishop writing from Carthage, in 392 CE claims, "We found in the library of the old priests writings of demons who drink the lifeblood of men. I cast them into the fire, for such lies serve only the devil." But were they lies? The consistency of reports across centuries and cultures suggests otherwise. Yet these texts, some dating back millennia, disappeared almost overnight under imperial orders. And when Christian scribes later copied surviving manuscripts, they often altered key passages. References to night feeders became vague demons or wicked spirits. Names of places and victims vanished. Detailed rituals were replaced with generic prayers to Christ or the saints. By the Middle Ages, Europe believed vampires were local superstitions, born from plague hysteria, ever suspecting entire civilizations once fought them on battlefields lit by eclipsed suns. Project Silence. The most chilling revelation comes from decrypted letters discovered in the Vatican archives in 1947, describing something called Project Silentium, Project Silence. This wasn't just about burning books. It was about eliminating people. Scholars who studied forbidden texts, temple priests preserving oral traditions, soldiers who witnessed nocturnal battles firsthand. The letters list dozens, maybe hundreds marked for silencing under imperial and papal authority. One chilling line reads, "Let no tongue survive that recalls the night war. God wills one history, not many." In other words, not just censorship, erasure, controlling the past. Throughout history, conquerors have rewritten chronicles to glorify victories and hide atrocities. Spanish conquistadors burned Mayan codices, erasing centuries of knowledge. China's first emperor buried scholars alive to suppress rival histories. Modern regimes ban books and censor media to shape national memory. The Church, armed with divine authority and imperial legions, perfected this strategy. By destroying the record of pre-Christian civilizations battling supernatural forces, it positioned itself as humanity's first and only defense against evil. Truth became heresy. Heresy became ash. And ash tells no tales. Survivors of the purge, yet fragments escaped, hidden in remote monasteries, sealed in desert caves, buried beneath collapsed Templar scraps of papyri, half-burned codices, inscriptions weathered by centuries of wind and rain. Some were rediscovered during the Renaissance. Others surfaced only in the last 100 years, often confiscated by church authorities before scholars could study them. The Codex Sanguina itself may have survived only because rebellious monks in the 5th century smuggled it into the Vatican's deepest vault rather than destroy it. Why? Perhaps they feared losing knowledge that, though dangerous, might one day prove necessary again. Because here lies the greatest irony. While the Church burned, silenced, and erased, it also preserved the very secrets it sought to hide, locking them in archives, accessible only to popes, trusted archivists, and a few unfortunate scholars who rarely lived long afterward. And centuries later, when workers in southern France broke into a forgotten crypt beneath a medieval church, fragments of this erased history surfaced once again, setting the stage for modern rediscovery and modern danger. Scene 10. Modern rediscovery in France. It began, as history often does, by accident. In 1947, workers renovating a crumbling medieval church in southern France struck something unexpected beneath the stone floor, a sealed crypt, untouched for centuries. Inside lay dust-choked shelves, lined with scrolls, codices, and fragments of manuscripts preserved in clay jars. Some texts bore Greek letters, others Latin. A few, even older, were written in cuneiform on brittle clay tablets. When news of the discovery reached local scholars, they rushed to the site, eager to catalogue what might be a treasure trove of medieval theology. But as they unrolled the first scrolls, they realized these were no ordinary ecclesiastical writings. They described rituals under eclipse suns. They mapped layers of pale-skinned predators across Europe and the Near East. They named emperors, bishops, and popes involved in campaigns called Silentium Project Silence. One codex even referenced the Codex Sanguina, calling it the root text on humanity's ancient war against the night. The Vatican moved quickly. The cover-up. Within weeks, representatives from the Church arrived, citing preservation concerns and canonical authority over the documents. The scrolls and tablets were packed into crates and shipped to Rome under tight secrecy, but not before one courageous archaeologist whose name remains classified in certain French archives photographed dozens of pages by lantern light, smuggling the negatives out before Vatican officials could intervene. Those photographs, leaked decades later, show passages describing mass graves with stakes through the chest, lunar phase charts linked to night attacks, lists of individuals targeted for silencing by church decree. The handwriting, according to paleographers, dates back as early as the 4th century Sarite, when Constantine's edicts and the first purges began. The Vatican's reaction. Officially, the Church dismissed the texts as heretical fabrications, medieval forgeries designed to slander Christianity's rise to power. Privately, letters between Vatican archivists later exposed by journalists a different story. Urgent orders to seal the French manuscripts in Hereticus Maximus, warnings that public exposure could cause theological and historical upheaval. Discussions of rogue scholars attempting to translate surviving fragments. One 1952 memo even hints at surveillance of researchers believed to possess copies of the smuggled photographs. Why the secrecy? Historians skeptical of conspiracies argue the Church often hoarded sensitive texts, political treaties, early Gospels, accounts of clerical scandals to protect its image. But the content of these French manuscripts didn't describe ordinary corruption or doctrinal disputes. They spoke of a coordinated campaign to erase supernatural historibund libraries, assassinated witnesses, secret treaties with entities described in both pagan and Christian terms. If fake, why confiscate them at all? Why hide them in the very archives accused of suppressing such knowledge for centuries? The archaeologist's fate. The man who photographed the pages vanished in 1956 while traveling to deliver copies to a university in Switzerland. His notes, recovered from a Paris apartment, mention being followed and fearing agents of the Curia. To this day, neither he nor the missing photographs have been found, but a handful of images survived in private collections, surfacing decades later through journalists, whistleblowers, and eventually, the internet, where researchers began piecing together what Project Silence truly meant. Scientific analysis. In the 1970s, spectral imaging technology allowed scholars to read overwritten manuscript parchments, where medieval monks had scraped away older texts to reuse the material. Beneath hymns and psalms, they found faint traces of earlier writings mentioning solar eclipse rituals, night-feeding creatures, treaties between children of the sun, and houses of night. Carbon dating confirmed some layers dated back over 1,500 years, consistent with the French discoveries. The Vatican hack. Then, in 2012, anonymous hackers breached parts of the Vatican's digitized archives, leaking documents confirming Project Silence existed. Certain medieval inquisitions targeted not witches or heretics but scholars preserving pre-Christian records of night feeders. At least 3 popes ordered translations of texts later sealed in Hereticus Maximus, some describing biological traits of creatures of the blood. The Church dismissed the leaks as fabrications by malicious actors, but independent cybersecurity experts verified the files originated from Vatican servers, and so, fragments of a story suppressed for centuries began resurfacing through archaeology, photography, spectral imaging, and digital espionage. Yet the most explosive revelations were still to come. Anatomical studies, genetic anomalies, and evidence suggesting the night feeders were not only real, but may have shaped early human civilization itself. That is where our journey goes next. Scene 11. Genetic evidence and the architects of civilization. By the late 20th century, The world of archaeology and the world of genetics were about to collide, and the results would change everything historians thought they knew about humanity's past. For centuries, the Church had framed the night feeders as superstition at best, heresy at worst. Scholars dismissed ancient texts as symbolic, metaphorical, or outright fabricated. But science, unlike religion or politics, has no loyalty to dogma. It asks only one question: what does the evidence say? And the evidence began whispering something extraordinary. Skeletons that shouldn't exist. In 1994, excavations in Eastern Europe uncovered a mass grave near the village of Helikovice in the Czech Republic. Archaeologists expected victims of plague or medieval warfare. Instead, they found 14 skeletons buried with iron stakes driven through their rib cages, heavy stones pinning arms and legs, skulls deliberately crushed or removed. Radiocarbon dating placed the burials between the 10th and 12th centuries. Local folklore called them vampire graves. Scholars laughed nervously, noting similar finds across Poland, Bulgaria, and Italy. But then the DNA tests came back. Genetic anomalies. Analysis revealed mitochondrial DNA sequences not matching typical medieval populations. Some markers were so unusual that geneticists compared them to unknown archaic hominins, extinct human relatives like Neanderthals or Denisovans. Except these burials were only 1,000 years old, and some markers didn't match any known hominin at all. At first, researchers suspected contamination, but repeated tests at independent labs produced the same result: anomalies in blood and bone chemistry consistent across multiple so-called vampire graves. The Church reacts again. Within months, Vatican representatives quietly requested access to the remains for theological review when scientists refused, citing academic freedom. Funding for the excavations abruptly dried up. A leaked letter from 1996 shows a Vatican official warning local authorities that premature or sensational interpretations of anomalous burials risk public confusion and scandal. The implication was clear: stop digging, stop testing, stop talking. Science meets suppression. We've seen this before. Fossil discoveries suppressed in Victorian England for contradicting biblical timelines. Soviet scientists silenced for genetics research clashing with communist ideology. Modern pharmaceutical data buried to protect corporate profits. When evidence threatens power, religious, political, or economic instinct is always the same: control the narrative. Architects of civilization. Some leaked Vatican fragments suggest the Codex Sanguina described the night feeders not merely as predators, but as rulers, priests, even builders of early cities. One passage allegedly reads, "They taught the arts of stone and star. They drank of men, yet men drank of their wisdom." Could it be that ancient myths of gods descending from the Sumerian Anunnaki, Egyptian sky deities, Mesoamerican feathered serpents weren't gods at all, but memories of a race walking the line between human and something other? Mainstream historians reject this, insisting human civilization arose independently through agriculture, trade, and writing. But then, how do we explain identical pyramid building techniques across Egypt, Mesoamerica, and China? Astronomical alignments in ancient temples spanning continents. Mythologies worldwide describing pale, long-lived beings teaching mathematics, metallurgy, and law. Coincidence, collective imagination, or the fingerprints of something history tried to erase? The architects vanish. The Codex claims the survivors of the Great Purge retreated into hiding mountain fortresses, subterranean sanctuaries, remote islands, some allegedly interbred with humans, creating hybrid bloodlines among priests and nobles sworn to secrecy. Over centuries, these bloodlines either died out or disappeared into the shadows of history, leaving only whispers in myth and ritual. But if even fragments of their knowledge endured astronomy, architecture, metallurgy, it might explain sudden leaps in human civilization. Sumer inventing writing seemingly overnight, Egypt mastering monumental stonework within centuries, Mesoamericans charting Venus cycles with eerie precision. Was humanity taught or guided? Modern echoes. Conspiracy theorists leap on these ideas, weaving tales of secret societies, guarding ancient bloodlines, Templars, Freemasons, Illuminati. Historians roll their eyes. But then, in 2018, geneticists studying royal mummies in Egypt found markers suggesting non-local ancestry traces absent in surrounding populations. Similar anomalies appear in certain European noble families claiming descent from gods or heroes in medieval chronicles. The data doesn't prove vampires existed, but it hints at something unusual. Humanity's paced something powerful families, quietly preserved while religions buried the rest. And if the church spent centuries suppressing this story, one question looms larger than any other. What else have they hidden? Because deep in the Vatican archives lie not just texts and treaties, but reports of modern deaths, disappearances, and accidents surrounding anyone who digs too deeply. The war for truth, it seems, never ended. Scene 12. Researchers who vanished and the Vatican's long shadow. By the mid-20th century, archaeology, genetics, and historical scholarship had begun chipping away at the walls of silence built by centuries of religious and political power. Ancient manuscripts resurfaced, mass graves revealed grim secrets, scientific testing exposed anomalies the church had long insisted did not exist. And then people started dying. The first mysterious deaths. In 1956, the French archaeologist who photographed the scrolls found beneath the medieval church in southern France texts describing Project Silence and the Great Purge vanished en route to deliver the images to a Swiss university. His car was found abandoned on a mountain road. No body, no luggage. The negatives were never recovered. Police ruled it an accident. Colleagues called it convenient timing. The 1968 Rome incident. In 1968, Italian historian Marcello Benedetti publicly claimed he had seen the Codex Sanguina inside the Vatican archives while cataloguing medieval manuscripts. Weeks later, he fell from the balcony of his fifth-floor apartment. His notes, confiscated by authorities before journalists could study them, allegedly described a war between men and pale ones older than the flood. The Vatican issued no statement. Journalists silenced. In 1983, investigative journalist Laura Kessler began publishing a series of articles in German newspapers linking vampire folklore to suppressed archaeological discoveries in Eastern Europe. After receiving anonymous threats, she told colleagues she planned to name names connecting the Vatican to confiscated manuscripts. 2 days before her press conference, her apartment burned down. Authorities blamed faulty wiring. Friends swore she had no electrical issues before. The unfinished article draft recovered from the ashes mentioned Project Silence, heretical archives, and something called the Black Treaty. Patterns emerge. By the 1990s, conspiracy theorists catalogued over 20 unexplained deaths or disappearances involving researchers, journalists, or whistleblowers linked to archaeological digs uncovering vampire graves, leaked Vatican documents about Hereticus Maximus, genetic studies suggesting non-human markers in ancient remains. Skeptics dismiss these as coincidences or Cold War paranoia, but leaked Vatican letters from the 1970s authenticated by independent historians ascribe certain individuals as threats to doctrinal stability, barring appropriate intervention. The wording is deliberately vague. The timing is not. The long shadow of secrecy. Throughout history, institutions have silenced those who threaten power. Soviet dissidents vanishing or criticizing the regime. Cartels targeting journalists exposing corruption. Intelligence agencies erasing witnesses during covert operations. So when academics studying ancient vampiric lore die under mysterious circumstances, patterns feel less like conspiracy and more like standard operating procedure for power threatened by truth. The Vatican's official position: the Church denies everything. No Project Silence, no Codex Sanguina, no coordinated campaign to suppress supernatural history. When pressed about unexplained researcher deaths, Vatican spokesmen offer condolences, but insist the Church protects knowledge, not destroys it. Yet internal archives revealed by 2012 hackers contain lists of confiscated manuscripts labeled periculously Latin for dangerous. Many entries match texts reported missing from museums, universities, or private collections after Vatican interventions. The most recent case, in 2019, Serbian archaeologist Dragan Milosevic announced plans to publish findings from a cave system containing what he described as ritual chambers and unusual skeletal remains dating back 3,000 years. Weeks later, his research facility burned down in an electrical fire before samples could be analyzed. Local firefighters later admitted the building's entire electrical grid had been shut off at the time. Milosevic refused interviews afterward, saying only, "Some truths are too costly." Why? Why would any institution religious or secular go to such lengths to suppress this history? To protect faith from theological chaos, to prevent mass panic if vampires proved real, to hide ancient alliances between rulers and the so-called houses of night, or perhaps to conceal the possibility that some bloodlines, some secrets, some beings never disappeared entirely, because as researchers died, manuscripts burned, and archives locked tighter than ever. Another pattern: image sightings, whispers, and reports suggesting the night feeders didn't vanish with the Middle Ages. They adapted, they hid, and some believe they still walk among us. Scene 13. Do they still walk among us? For centuries, priests, scholars, and skeptics alike assumed the creatures described in Sumerian tablets, Egyptian papyri, and Roman chronicles had vanished after the Great Purge or the rise of Christianity. But modern reports tell a different story. The intelligence files. In 1975, declassified CIA documents revealed Cold War operatives investigating legends of blood-drinking cults in remote parts of Eastern Europe. One report from Romania described locals refusing to enter certain forests after sunset, citing figures with pale faces attacking livestock. US agents dismissed it as peasant superstition till they found mutilated animals drained entirely of blood. The file's closing line reads chillingly, "Further investigation not recommended. Locals hostile. Atmosphere uneasy." The Siberian incident. In 1991, Russian geologists surveying abandoned mines in Siberia reported human-like figures watching them from cave entrances at night. When one man vanished, police blamed wolves, but the search team found his body days later. No animal bite marks, no signs of conventional struggle, blood volume almost zero. The official report, leaked years later, labeled the death unexplained exsanguination. Urban legends or urban sightings. In 2003, London newspapers reported a string of bizarre attacks near the Thames. Victims found unconscious, anemic, with small puncture wounds on their necks. Police suggested drug use or gang hazing rituals, but no suspects were ever caught. Locals called the unknown assailant the London Leech. The attacks stopped after 6 weeks, never solved, never explained. The predator that learns, if such beings survived history's purges, they wouldn't reveal themselves in crowded cities or under modern surveillance. Predators evolve. Wolves became nocturnal to avoid humans. Big cats adapted hunting patterns around human activity. If the night feeders survived, wouldn't they do the same? Coming myths in an age of cameras, satellites, and drones. Leaked Vatican memo. In 2014, hackers released emails allegedly from Vatican archives referencing modern sightings in South America, Eastern Europe, and Central Africa. One line stands out. While contained, the situation requires continued discretion. The faithful must not know the old enemy endures. The Church dismissed the emails as forgeries, but independent cybersecurity experts authenticated the metadata. Eyewitness accounts. A 1987 anthropological study in Papua New Guinea documented tribes describing pale-skinned visitors demanding blood sacrifices during eclipses. A 2009 UN peacekeeping report from the Congo mentions villagers fleeing creatures in the trees, attacking at night. Claims dismissed as local superstition. Mountaineers in the Carpathians tell stories of the strigoi, shadowy figures, watching campsites from cliff edges, vanishing when approached. Individually, These accounts seem like folklore. Collectively, they form a pattern stretching across continents and decades. Theological panic. If even fragments of these stories are true, the Church faces a nightmare. 2,000 years, claiming divine supremacy over darkness. Centuries of denying creatures like this ever existed, and the possibility that survivors still walk among us, unchanged, unbowed, beyond the reach of salvation itself. No wonder suppression continues. Pop culture coincidence a clue. Critics argue vampire legends thrive today because of movies, novels, and video games, not reality. But folklore scholars note something strange. The same physical trait, sunlight aversion, blood hunger, immortality in cultures with no historical contact. The same symbol stakes, silver, eclipses reaped across continents. Did Hollywood invent these tropes or preserve fragments of an older, darker memory? Because the next question is even more unsettling. If they still exist, what do they want now? The Codex Sanguina suggests treaties, alliances, even pacts between human rulers and the houses of night. If those agreements survived history's purges, who honors them today? And at what cost? Scene 14. The Black Treaties and humanity's secret pacts. As fragments of the Codex Sanguina surface through leaks, smuggled photographs, and recovered manuscripts, one revelation eclipsed even the wars, purges, and secret archives. It spoke of treaties, not victories, not exterminations, agreements between kings, priests, and rulers on one side and the so-called houses of night on the other. The Black Treaties. One fragment, translated from late Roman Latin, describes a document called Foedus Tenebris, the Black Treaty signed between human monarchs and the Pale Courts. The treaty allegedly promised safe havens for surviving night feeders in remote regions, secrecy enforced by death for anyone discovering their existence, tribute of livestock and sometimes criminals or war captives to prevent attacks on civilian populations. In return, the creatures agreed to abandon open predation on human settlements, share wisdom of stars and metals with rulers, intervene in wars or plagues when requested, offering skills beyond mortal men. If true, this would mean the same rulers who publicly called them demons privately made deals with the realpolitik alliance between crown and crypt. Whispers across centuries. Medieval chronicles hint at such pacts. A 12th century Hungarian text speaks of the Lord of the Carpathians granting lands to Strigoi exchange for peace. Norse sagas mention pale allies aiding Viking chieftains under moonlit oaths. Chinese records from the Tang dynasty describe border tribes worshipping night gods who protected villages from raiders. Historians dismiss these as myths or metaphors, but the patterns repeat across continents and eras, always tied to rulers, secrecy, and blood. Power protects itself. History shows elites will ally with any onipirates, mercenaries, even criminal if it serves political survival. Roman emperors hired barbarian tribes as border guards. Medieval kings paid Viking raiders to attack rival kingdoms. Modern governments secretly arm rebels while denouncing them publicly. Why would ancient rulers be any different? If the night feeders existed and offered power, protection, or forbidden knowledge, wouldn't some kings take the deal? The Vatican's dilemma. Leaked 17th century letters between Jesuit scholars mention pacts of darkness made by heathen kings before the light of Christ banished the old alliances. Yet internal Vatican documents from as late as 1823 describe confiscating a manuscript called Pactum Sanguinis, a blood pact from a monastery in Transylvania. If the Church truly destroyed all such records, why were some still circulating over 1,000 years after Constantine? Did the pacts survive the purges along with those who signed them? Conspiracy theories and modern echoes. This is where speculation explodes. Secret societies like the Freemasons or Illuminati accused of guarding bloodline secrets. European royal families rumored to descend from otherworldly ancestors. 20th century dictators fascinated by occult relics. Hitler's SS scoured Europe for artifacts tied to immortality myths. Mainstream historians reject these connections, but fragments of the Black Treaties hint some alliances may have survived into the modern era negotiated, hidden behind layers of religion, politics, and finance. The price of silence. The Codex warns breaking the treaties invited retaliation. One line reads, "He who betrays the pale cords shall see his line ended before the third moon." Folklore echoes this. Balkan legends tell of noble families cursed after defying Strigoi. Scottish tales describe clans vanishing, their breaking oaths sworn under shadow. In India, royal chronicles blame entire dynasties' downfalls on betraying the night gods. Were these just superstitions or echoes of real consequences enforced by something far older than kings or popes? The Last Known Pact, a controversial 1922 diary from a Carpathian priest, claims local nobles secretly met with pale emissaries during World War I to prevent attacks on refugee camps. The priest vanished before publishing his full account. Skeptics call it forgery. Believers call it the last Black Treaty in history, because if even fragments of these pacts survived, it means the story of the Night Feeders didn't end with medieval superstition or Vatican suppression. It means a secret, negotiated coexistence may have continued into the modern world and hidden behind politics, religion, and power, but never truly broken. And that raises the final, haunting question. If they still walk among us, what role do they play now? Scene 15. The architects of power and the modern world. The Black Treaties hinted at something most historians refuse to consider, that the Night Feeders didn't simply survive humanity's purges, they may have shaped the very civilizations that tried to erase them. And if fragments of those pacts endured across centuries, where would we expect to find their traces today? Look to power. Always to power. Bloodlines and legends. Across Europe, certain royal families have long claimed descent from divine or semi-divine ancestors. The Merovingian kings of France said they were born of a sacred bloodline stretching back to mysterious pre-Christian figures. Romanian chronicles call Vlad Gepe Dracula himself son of the dragon, linking him to ancient warrior cults predating Christianity. In Ireland, medieval bards sang of kings descended from the Tuatha Dé Danann, pale, long-lived beings from beyond the mists. Folklore, probably, but then geneticists in the 21st century began sequencing DNA from royal burials and found animalius rare haplogroups absent in surrounding populations, suggesting non-local ancestry introduced centuries earlier. Coincidence? Perhaps, but the legends keep whispering. Secret societies and occult symbols. During the Renaissance, Europe erupted with rumors of hidden brotherhoods guarding ancient knowledge. Knights Templar, Rosicrucians, Freemasons. Conspiracy theorists point to their obsession with blood symbolism, solar eclipses, and architecture aligned with celestial events. Freemason lodges display twin pillars, moons, and suns motifs appearing in Sumerian, Egyptian, and Mesoamerican temples long before Christianity. The Templars were accused of worshipping Baphomet, a horned, nocturnal figure linked to forbidden rituals. Renaissance alchemists hunted elixirs of life echoing legends of vampiric immortality. Historians call it esoteric nonsense, but leaked Vatican letters from the 1700s describe heretical fraternities preserving fragments of the Pale Treaties. If true, it suggests secret societies weren't inventing myths, they were inheriting them. Power hides in plain sight. Consider how intelligence agencies operate today. Covert treaties signed in secret. Technologies developed decades before the public learns of them. Operations denied even as evidence leaks out slowly over years. Why would ancient powers behave differently? If the Black Treaties existed, secrecy wasn't just about survival. It was about control. Who speaks? Who knows? Who rules? World War II and the occult obsession. Declassified Allied reports confirm that the SS units scoured Europe for relics tied to immortality myths, the Holy Grail, the Spear of Destiny, even rumoured blood rites from Transylvania. One British intelligence file claims German officers raided a Carpathian monastery in 1944, searching for codices older than Christ. None were ever found, or if they were, no one talks about it. The Cold War and the silence. Soviet archives declassified after 1991 mention KGB investigations into vampiric folklore Eastern Europe, dismissing it publicly as counter-revolutionary superstition. Privately, they catalogue dozens of reports, mass graves with stake skeletons, villagers abandoning entire towns after unexplained attacks, sightings of pale men vanishing into forests. Yet no official Soviet study ever reached the public. Why? Some researchers suspect an unspoken Cold War agreement between East and West to suppress anything blurring the line between myth and reality. The architects today, and now, in the 21st century, fragments surface again. Anonymous whistleblowers claiming multinational corporations fund excavations of anomalous remains through shell organizations. Geneticists noting unexplained markers in samples quietly removed from public databases after Vatican or government interest. Journalists investigating secretive land purchases in remote areas, once tied to vampire legends, only to abandon their stories without explanation. Patterns form, but like shadows at twilight, they vanish when you look too closely. A chilling possibility. What if the night feeders don't rule openly? What if their descendants, allies, or worshippers hold influence through wealth, religion, or politics, pulling strings not as kings or priests, but as bankers, CEOs, or philanthropists shaping global agendas under benevolent smiles? Conspiracy fantasy? Maybe. But history shows power rarely vanishes. It adapts, it hides, it survives. And if fragments of the Black Treaties endure even now, then humanity truly won the ancient war described in the Codex Sanguina. At best it negotiated a ceasefire, which means the next question isn't whether the night feeders existed, it's whether the truce still holds, and what happens if it ever breaks. Scene 16. The truce and the threat of its collapse. If the Black Treaties truly existed, agreements binding kings, priests, and night feeders in a pact of secrecy and survival for centuries, humanity lived under an unspoken balance. But balances can break, and recent decades hint at cracks spreading through the walls of silence built over 2,000 years ago. The leaked memorandum. In 1998, Italian journalist Marco Bellini claimed to have received fragments of a Vatican memorandum dated 1963. The document, allegedly circulated among senior cardinals, warned of pale emissaries appearing in Eastern Europe after World War I seeking to renegotiate certain provisions of the ancient agreements. The memo, if authentic, contained chilling lines. The compact strains. The old tribes grow restless. They claim the blood oaths weaken with each century. Our shepherds must prepare for contingencies should the night break its peace. 2 weeks after announcing plans to publish the memorandum, Bellini died in what police called a traffic accident. His family received no copy of the text. Global unrest and the old legends. Conspiracy researchers point to strange patterns in recent history. The Balkan Wars of the 1990s saw villages emptied under mysterious circumstances, locals whispering of the Strigoi returned. During the Syrian civil war, abandoned mountain monasteries reportedly contained medieval scrolls describing treaty oaths between Christian monks and night visitors centuries earlier. A 2007 UN report on human trafficking in Eastern Europe mentions unexplained disappearances in rural Romania dismissed as criminal activity, despite missing person cases with no ransom, suspects, or bodies found. Are these coincidences of war and chaos, or signs the old truce phrase where law and order collapse? When secrecy fails, every treaty in history eventually ends. The Pax Romana collapsed into barbarian invasions. Medieval truces between Christian and Muslim kingdoms broke in crusades. Colonial treaties with indigenous peoples shattered under expansion and greed. Why would a pact between humanity and night feeders endure forever, especially as human technology erodes the secrecy they depended upon? Satellites see everything. Drones patrol remote mountains. Thermal imaging tracks any heat signature in the dark. What happens when modern eyes expose ancient predators? The incident in 2015. A leaked EU security briefing from 2015 dismissed officially as a hoax describes a rogue attack in the Carpathian Mountains, killing 12 hikers, under circumstances resembling medieval vampire legends, exsanguination, bodies burned afterward by unidentified locals. The briefing warns, if authentic, this represents the first known violation of post-compact accords in over a century. Recommend suppression to prevent panic. The story never reached mainstream news, but Romanian bloggers reported military roadblocks in the region that same month. Religious anxiety. Pope Benedict XVI, before his resignation in 2013, gave a cryptic Easter Vigil homily mentioning ancient powers returning from shadows cast before Christ himself. The Vatican later edited the phrase from official transcripts, calling it a translation error, but conspiracy forums erupted, claiming Benedict hinted at rising tensions with the Pale tribes after centuries of uneasy peace. Scientific clues. Geneticists studying remote populations in Eastern Europe recently discovered isolated communities with rare blood disorders linked to sunlight sensitivity and unusual longevity. Most cases trace to villages with medieval legends of Strigoi and Ware. Coincidentally, many residents refuse blood tests from outside researchers. Are these merely inherited conditions or traces of something older, guarded by communities still honoring ancient pacts? The risk of collapse. If the Black Treaties guaranteed secrecy and survival for both sides, what happens when modern science exposes genetic evidence? Archaeology uncovers treaty texts or layers buried for centuries. Digital leaks reveal Vatican archives to the world. Would the Night Feeders honor a pact once humanity breaks its side of the bargain through discovery? Or would the old tribes, as the Vatican memo called them, see exposure itself as betrayal voiding the truce entirely? The final question. If even fragments of the Codex Sanguina and treaty documents are true, the collapse of that ancient peace wouldn't be supernatural revenge. It would be war. A war humanity no longer remembers, against an enemy that never truly left. And as researchers, journalists, and whistleblowers keep dying mysteriously, some investigators believe the unraveling has already begun. Because if 3 popes, multiple scholars, and modern archaeologists risked their lives to suppress or reveal this story, it means forces both human and inhuman will kill to keep it buried, and maybe to prepare for what comes next. Scene 17. Whistleblowers, deaths, and the war for the truth. As the 20th century ended and the 21st began, the battle over the Codex Sanguina, the Black Treaties, and the legacy of the Night Feeders moved from monasteries and archives into the chaotic world of journalism, digital leaks, and international secrecy, and with it came a wave of whistleblowers and mysterious deaths. The Archivist's Confession, 2002. In 2002, a former Vatican archivist known only as G gave an anonymous interview to an Italian documentary crew. His voice distorted, face hidden in shadow, he claimed. The Vatican possessed at least 40 manuscripts describing treaties with Night Feeders. 3 popes had ordered the destruction of evidence, while others wanted it preserved for darker times. Modern scientists analyzing confiscated remains did not die by accident. 2 months after filming, the archivist was found dead in his apartment. The official cause: heart failure. He was 42 years old. The Hacker Collective 2012. In 2012, a group calling itself Lux Veritatis, Light of Truth, hacked portions of the Vatican's digitized archives. They released 16th century letters describing Foedus Tenebris, the Black Treaty, 19th century reports of pale emissaries visiting remote monasteries, a 1947 memo urging suppression of archaeological incidents in Eastern Europe. The Vatican called the files fabrications. Cybersecurity analysts authenticated the metadata. Within a year, 3 members of Lux Veritatis died, 1 in a car crash, 1 by suicide, 1 missing off the coast of Malta. Coincidence? Perhaps, but conspiracy forums called it the Digital Inquisition. Journalists and vanishing stories. In 2015, Spanish journalist Elena Marquez investigated mass graves in Bulgaria, linked to medieval vampire legends. Her article stopped abruptly, Friends say she received anonymous warnings before leaving journalism entirely. In 2017, British blogger Thomas Caldwell announced plans to publish leaked photos of the Codex Sanguina. His website went offline. He hasn't posted since. A 2019 documentary team in Romania vanished while filming near alleged treaty sites in the Carpathians. Their footage surfaced online 2 years later, uploaded anonymously, incomplete, and badly degraded. Truth versus power. This isn't the first time knowledge cost lives. Soviet scientists studying Chernobyl radiation were silenced for contradicting official reports. Corporate whistleblowers exposing environmental disasters disappeared or faced sudden accidents. Journalists investigating intelligence agencies routinely die under suspicious circumstances. But the Codex Sanguina story isn't about politics or pollution. It's about who controls the history of the human race itself. The pattern of suppression. Leaked Vatican letters from 1981 outline tactics for neutralizing dangerous narratives. Discredit the source publicly. Confiscate evidence under claims of historical preservation. Isolate researchers with academic pressure or funding cuts. Eliminate only when secrecy faces imminent threat. One chilling line reads, "Dead men tell no tales, nor do ruined reputations." The cost of curiosity. Between 1950 and 2020, conspiracy researchers count 34 unexplained deaths of academics linked to vampiric archaeology, 22 disappearances of journalists covering leaks or mass grave excavations, multiple lab fires destroying DNA evidence from anomalous remains. Skeptics argue these numbers prove nothing. Believers call it a slow-motion war against history itself. The digital battlefield. The internet changed everything. Suppression once required burning libraries. Now it means controlling servers. Whistleblowers can leak gigabytes instant-libit. Opponents can erase reputations just as fast. Deepfakes, disinformation, and online trolling muddy real evidence in seas of hoaxes. Some researchers claim this chaos isn't accidental. If the truth risks exposure, bury it under 1,000 fakes until no one knows what's real. A final leak. In 2021, an encrypted file circulated on dark web forums titled Sanguina Protocol. It allegedly contained photos of treaty fragments in Latin and Greek, maps marking medieval safe havens for night feeders, a 1963 Vatican memo warning the compact weakens, the watchers grow restless. Within weeks, the file vanished from hosting sites. Accounts sharing it were deleted. Some claim the document proved the ancient truce collapsed decades ago. Others call it an elaborate hoax. Either way, the people who posted it haven't been heard from since. Because if the truce is Goland, the silence breaks. Then humanity faces a future shaped not by faith or science, but by whatever walks in the shadows, waiting for the day the war resumes. And maybe, just maybe it already has. Scene 18. The Fall of the Long Night. 4 centuries. The Codex Sanguina, the Black Treaties, and the Vatican archives painted a picture of ancient war followed by an easy truce of fragile silence, held together by secrecy, fear, and blood. But silence doesn't last forever, and scattered across the modern world are hints, faint, terrifying hints that the long night may be stirring again. The Romanian disappearances. Between 2001 and 2007, remote villages in the Carpathian Mountains reported livestock slaughtered, bodies drained of blood, and entire families vanishing without trace. Local police blamed wolves, but leaked Romanian military reports mention ritual signs carved into trees, stones placed over burial sites, and villagers performing ancient rites of protection unseen since medieval times. The reports were never meant for public release. The Syrian manuscripts. During the Syrian civil war, looters raiding an abandoned monastery of Aleppo uncovered chests of medieval scrolls. Some described Fodas Tenebris, the Black Treaty in languages mixing Greek, Latin, and Arabic. One passage warns, "Break the oath, and the children of night shall rise when the world sleeps, and no king nor priest shall command them." The manuscripts vanished into black market antiquities networks before scholars could authenticate them. The 2019 Congo outbreak. Officially, it was just another Ebola flare-up in the Congo basin. Unofficially, doctors reported victims with complete exsanguination of detail are released to the public, but leaked by a whistleblower in 2020. The whistleblower vanished weeks later. Coincidence or pattern? Skeptics dismiss these events as superstition colliding with modern chaos. War zones breed rumors. Epidemics inspire fear. Rural legends persist for centuries after reality fades. But believers see a pattern. The Romanian vanishings in lands, once tied to the Carpathian treaties. Syrian manuscripts warning about broken oaths. Modern outbreaks echoing medieval descriptions of blood plagues blamed on night feeders. Coincidence of the first cracks in 1,000-year truce. The Black Sun prophecy. A fragment from the Codex Sanguina mentions a black sun king, the return of the Pale tribes after centuries of hiding. When day becomes night and the earth bleeds again, the old war shall wake from its graves. During the 2017 solar eclipse, social media exploded with conspiracy claims linking it to the prophecy. Most were jokes, but in rural Romania, villagers locked doors, shuttered windows, and buried iron nails at crossroads rituals, recorded in medieval chronicles during outbreaks of alleged Strigoi attacks. Leaked Vatican letter 2021. Hackers in 2021 released a Vatican letter allegedly written to the Archbishop of Bucharest warning of ancient threats resurfacing in Carpathian provinces. The letter, dated months before the Romanian disappearances hit local news, urged renewed discretion and containment before panic spreads among the faithful. The Vatican called it forgery. Journalists noted the letter's watermark matched genuine courier documents. The human problem. Even if the night feeders returned, modern humanity might not notice or care. Wars drown rural reports in bigger headlines. Governments suppress panic to avoid economic collapse. Social media buries real leaks under layers of memes, hoaxes, and conspiracy noise. If predators walked again in the shadows, would anyone connect the dots? Or would every incident become just another unsolved crime, strange disappearance, or internet rumor ignored by a distracted world? A war we can't fight. Ancient civilizations used eclipses, silver, sacred metals, and ritual warfare against the night feeders. Today, we have drones, satellites, and genetic engineering, but we've lost the knowledge ancient priests, kings, and warriors once guarded, the very knowledge the Vatican buried, burned, or locked away for centuries. If the old enemy rises again, we may face it blind. And maybe that's the point. Maybe the reason scholars die, manuscripts vanish, and archives stay locked isn't just to protect faith or power. Maybe it's to keep humanity ignorant and helpless if the truth shatters. Because the last time the night feeders ruled, entire civilizations united to stop them. Next time, we might not be so lucky. Scene 19. The last warning and the coming darkness. The scattered whispers, leaked manuscripts, and mysterious deaths all point toward one unsettling reality. If the long night truly is returning, someone out there already knows, and they're terrified. The Geneva audio file 2022. In early 2022, an encrypted audio file surfaced on dark web forums, allegedly recorded at a private meeting between EU officials, EU security agents, and two unidentified observers. The conversation discussed containment protocols for anomalous attacks in Eastern Europe. The voices mention Carpathian incidents matching medieval chronicles, blood-drained victims found in clusters near old monastery ruins, local populations performing rituals predating Christianity. One speaker warns, if this spreads beyond rural zones, control ends. Faith collapses next. The file disappeared within weeks. Accounts hosting it were deleted. The Romanian defector. In late 2022, a retired Romanian intelligence officer gave an anonymous interview to a European journalist. He claimed the military monitored remote mountain regions after unexplained killings since the 1990s. Certain caves and ruins were designated forbidden zones by both church and state. A classified 2015 report described non-human entities engaging local villagers under what he called ancient agreements. The journalist planned the documentary. She died in a car accident before filming began. History repeats. When plague hit medieval Europe, priests blamed sin, rulers blamed witches, and peasants blamed one another. Truth drowned in fear until millions died. If something older than disease and thing predatoriaten today, would modern governments act differently? Or would they hide it, suppress it, weaponize it just as kings and popes did 1,000 years ago? The Vatican's final silence. In 2023, Pope Francis was asked during a private Q&A about myths of vampires and demons in church archives. He smiled, shook his head, and gave a strange reply. Some things serve no good by being known. Within hours, Vatican officials told journalists the Pope's words were misinterpreted, but independent Italian media reported unusual activity in the apostolic archives. That same week sealed chambers opened. Documents moved under heavy guard. The astronomer's note. Also in 2023, an astronomer in Chile leaked calculations showing a total solar eclipse would cast nearly 7 minutes of darkness over Eastern Europe in August 2027, the longest in over a century. Why does this matter? Because the Codex Sanguina describes ancient purges, treaties, and uprisings all tied to eclipses as sacred windows when balance between night and day falters. The astronomer wrote in his email, if the prophecy fragments align, the next eclipse might mark more than a celestial event. 2 months later, his university revoked his research funding without explanation. Speculation or warning. Conspiracy forums erupted. Some claim the 2027 eclipse will trigger the return of the Pale Tribes if the truce no longer holds. Others believe governments and churches already prepare in secret, stockpiling weapons, sealing archives, silencing leaks. A few insist the Vatican itself will reveal the truth before the eclipse, though history suggests otherwise. Most people laugh, scroll past, and move on to celebrity news. But so did medieval peasants, until villages fell silent overnight. The hacker's final message. In late 2023, an anonymous hacker, calling himself Maledictus, posted fragments of Latin text, allegedly from Hereticus Maximus. The second breaking comes when man forgets the first. The pale courts return when the last oath fades, not with armies, but with hunger. 2 days later, his accounts vanished. His final post read only, "Too late now. Watch the skies." And so we arrive at the edge of history, faith, and fear, where ancient wars, medieval treaties, and modern secrets converge under the shadow of a coming eclipse. If the long night truly returns, humanity may face it with forgotten weapons, buried knowledge, and leaders more interested in control than survival. Unless the truth breaks first. Scene 20. The lesson in the shadows. Across 20 scenes, we have traced humanity's darkest whispers, from Sumerian tablets to Vatican vaults, from ancient treaties to modern disappearances. We have seen kings, priests, scientists, and whistleblowers alike risk everything to reveal a suppressed truth buried in blood and shadow. And now we stand at the edge of history, asking the same question people have asked for over 3,000 years. What walks beside us in the dark? The weight of forgotten wars. The Codex Sanguina spoke of exterminations, alliances, and betrayal spanning continents. Civilizations united under eclipsed suns to drive the night feeders into hiding. Yet, when the smoke cleared, rulers signed treaties. Instead of finishing the war treaties, the church later buried beneath centuries of doctrine and fire. If these records are true, humanity didn't defeat its oldest enemy, it negotiated with it. Unlike all truces, it was written in temporary ink, the Vatican's bargain. For centuries, the church claimed to guard humanity's soul, while hoarding manuscripts describing treaties with inhuman powers. They silenced scholars, burned libraries, sealed archives tighter than tombs. Why? To protect faith, to prevent panic, or to maintain power by controlling who speaks of the darkness, and when? Maybe all three. Because knowledge is more dangerous than any monster. Monsters kill bodies. Knowledge topples empires. The return of the long night. Now the signs accumulate. Disappearances in remote mountains. Mass graves unearthed by archaeologists. Leaked memos warning of restless pale tribes. Upcoming eclipses matching prophecies buried for centuries. If the truce collapses, will modern governments tell the truth? Or will they bury it again, sacrificing lives for secrecy until the wall reaches city streets where no censorship can contain it? History suggests the latter, the real enemy. Perhaps the night feeders were never humanity's only enemy. The church hid knowledge to protect power. Kings traded subjects' lives for political gain. Modern institutions silence whistleblowers while claiming to serve the public good. Again and again, humans chose control over truth until we forgot the war entirely. And maybe that was the plan all along, because what better way to win than to erase memory itself? The price of silence. Every burned scroll, every murdered scholar, every missing journalist carried the same warning. Some truths demand a price in blood. Maybe that price comes when silence ends. Maybe it comes when the truce breaks. Or maybe we already pay it, one disappearance at a time, while officials smile and tell us monsters aren't real. The lesson in the shadows. If the long night returns, it will not be with medieval superstition or Hollywood drama. It will come as it always has, quiet at first, ignored by the powerful, dismissed by skeptics, surviving in whispers until it walks openly again. The lesson isn't about vampires or treaties or Vatican secrets. It's about history itself, how easily it burns, how quickly it silences, how little we learn when knowledge hides behind locked doors. Because the real darkness isn't what waits beyond the walls of civilization. It's what power keeps from the people inside them. A choice for the living. So we end where we began. Ancient wars buried in ash. Manuscripts locked in vaults. Researchers dying with secrets on their tongues. But the night always waits. And when the next eclipse falls, when rumors rise again, when blood turns myth into memory, humanity will have to choose. Truth or comfort, light or silence, freedom or fear. Because monsters aren't the only things that hunt in the dark. If you've followed this story across 20 scenes, you now carry pieces of that forbidden history yourself. Perhaps the Vatican feared exactly this, that knowledge spreads like fire once lit. Perhaps the Codex Sanguina warned not only of monsters in the shadows, but of what happens when humanity refuses to look at them. The night is watching. The truce may be breaking, and the choice between truth and silence will not stay buried forever.